Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it without raising her voice. Not angry, almost bored. She said I only touched her when I wanted something. Like my hands had a motive she'd finally decoded. I remember the pause after that. The way she waited for me to defend myself. I didn't. I told her that now I wouldn't even want that. She asked what changed. That was the moment the room went quiet in a way she didn't understand yet. I work immigration. Control, distance, rules that don't bend because someone feels misunderstood. I spend my days reading faces that lie for survival. I know the difference between need and performance. With her, I'd ignored it too long. She lived in reactions. Events. Lighting. Applause. She needed a room the way lungs need air. I used to think I balanced that. I didn't see that balance had turned into permission. That night, I left before she could reframe it. Drove my Toyota Tacoma around the block twice, not to cool off, but to make sure I wasn't coming back with words. I didn't want words. Words keep things alive. I wanted stillness. The next day, between shifts, I ate at Subway. Same order I always get. Standing up. No messages. No checking my phone. I realized how often I'd used touch to keep the peace. A hand on her back when she drifted. A kiss to smooth tension I didn't cause. She called that wanting something. She wasn't wrong. I wanted quiet. I wanted alignment. I wanted to feel chosen without asking. At home, she filled space the way she always did. Music on. Lights too bright. She talked at me, not to me. About a promoter she'd met. A guy from the nightlife side. Loud, smiling, frictionless. She framed it like a joke. I saw the calculation underneath. She wanted to see if I'd flinch. If I'd reach. I didn't. That was the shift she felt but couldn't name. I stopped touching. Not to punish. To synchronize. If my hands were currency, I withdrew them from circulation. I spoke clearly. I moved cleanly. When she passed me in the hallway, I didn't adjust my body to hers. I kept walking. That night, she played games on the PlayStation with the volume high. I went to bed early. She stood in the doorway longer than necessary, waiting for gravity to pull me back into old habits. It didn't. She thought she'd accused me of something small. She didn't realize she'd described the last lever she had. The first crack didn't come from her. It came from someone who had no reason to lie to me. A junior officer I trained years ago stopped me in the corridor and asked, casually, if I still lived near Harbor District. I said yes. He nodded, then hesitated, then said he'd seen my wife at a launch party there the previous weekend. Late. Close to a guy everyone in that circle knew. A promoter. Loud name. Empty resume. The kind of man I'd dismissed out loud once, not because I was jealous, but because I couldn't imagine taking him seriously. I thanked the officer and kept walking. No confrontation. No spike in pulse. Just confirmation. At home, I watched patterns instead of moments. How she timed her exits. How she showered immediately after certain nights. How her phone stayed face down when she sat near me now, not careless like before, but guarded. She wasn't hiding desire. She was staging power. She wanted to prove her body could still redirect the room, even if I refused to look. Between shifts, I went back to Subway. Same stool by the window. I started noticing how much easier breathing felt when no one was waiting for a reaction from me. I didn't check her socials. I didn't need pictures. I'd spent a career reading intent without evidence. Evidence comes later. Intent comes first. At night, she filled the apartment with sound. The PlayStation stayed on even when she wasn't holding the controller. A moving background, like applause without an audience. She talked about events she might travel to. Names she dropped too carefully. She brushed past me in the kitchen once, deliberately, shoulder to chest, testing friction. I didn't move. That confused her more than anger ever would. She began narrating herself, louder, sharper, like a performer sensing the crowd drift. She said things into the air about being desired, about being noticed, about not being invisible. I stayed precise. Dinner at the same time. Gym at the same time. Sleep without ceremony. I fixed a cabinet hinge she'd complained about for months. Went to Lowe's, bought the part, installed it cleanly, didn't mention it. Control isn't loud. It's consistent. The promoter's name started appearing in her sentences more often. Not attached to events now. Just anecdotes. Casual mentions. That was the tell. She wanted me to ask. She wanted to see if touch would return as a plea or a warning. I understood then that whatever line she was crossing, she'd chosen it because I wouldn't chase her across it. She wanted to weaponize distance. She didn't realize distance was my native language. That night, lying in bed beside her, not touching, I made a decision I didn't announce. I would let her complete the move she'd already started. Not because I needed proof. Because silence forces truth to finish its sentence on its own. Proof didn't arrive as a revelation. It arrived as a pattern finishing itself. I didn't go looking for messages. I didn't need to. When you stop filling silence, people rush to occupy it. She started leaving earlier, coming back later. Her explanations grew efficient, polished, like lines tested on smaller audiences before being brought home. I watched the timing instead of the words. The gaps told me everything. One afternoon, between appointments, I sat in my car and checked our shared account. Not because I suspected theft, because money never lies accidentally. There were small charges clustered around nights she said were networking. Ride shares to the same block. Drinks bought in rounds. Nothing dramatic. Just consistency. Desire is messy. Control is neat. This was neat. At home, I noticed how she handled her phone now. Not secrecy. Curation. She'd scroll with purpose, stop when I passed, then resume slower, like she was allowing herself to be seen doing nothing wrong. That's when I understood this wasn't about hiding from me. It was about making sure I saw just enough. She stopped asking why I didn't touch her. That phase ended quickly. Instead, she started narrating absence, commenting on how long it had been, how quiet the apartment felt, how strange it was to sleep without contact. She wanted guilt to do what attraction couldn't. I stayed neutral. I stayed exact. One night, she came home energized in a way that didn't belong to us. Not relaxed. Charged. She dropped her jacket on the chair and went straight to the shower. I fixed a loose door frame she'd pointed out weeks earlier, the one by the bedroom, using tools I'd picked up earlier at Lowe's. The sound of water masked the drill. The repair was invisible. Solid. Permanent. Later, I found a photo by accident. Not hidden. Left open on her tablet on the counter. A reflection shot. Club lighting. A man behind her, hands where hands go when they think they're allowed. I didn't zoom. I didn't save it. I closed the screen. That was enough. The moment proof stops being painful is the moment it becomes useful. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. She hadn't chosen him. She'd chosen the reaction she thought he'd force out of me. She'd chosen to prove her body still had leverage. That leverage required hunger. I no longer had it. That night, she waited longer than usual for me to come to bed. The PlayStation hummed in the background, controller untouched. When I did lie down, I stayed on my side. Still. Predictable. She turned toward me, then away. Restless. In that space, I made the shift that changes outcomes. I stopped thinking about what she was doing. I started thinking about what I was removing next. I didn't announce the disappearance. I just stopped being reachable. The first thing I did was remove friction. I rerouted my schedule so there were no shared gaps. Early mornings. Later returns. Meals eaten standing up, usually at Subway, where nobody expects conversation and everything tastes the same no matter what day it is. Routine is a kind of camouflage. When you move predictably, people stop tracking you. At home, I began subtracting. Not emotionally. Physically. A jacket gone. A drawer lighter. Tools moved into my trunk. She didn't notice at first. She was busy staging normalcy. Laughing louder. Filling the apartment with sound from the PlayStation, like noise could pin me in place. I posted an ad on Craigslist from my phone during a break. Short. Clean. One room available. Month to month. No story attached. I didn't tell her. Explanations create negotiations. I wasn't negotiating. When she finally noticed the changes, she framed them as moods. Asked if work was heavy. Said I felt far away. She tried to touch my arm once while saying it, like proximity might pull me back into alignment. I stepped sideways without comment. Not dramatic. Just accurate. That's when the panic started. Not visible yet. Internal. She began checking her phone more often, not for messages from him, but for reactions from me. She started asking logistical questions. Where I'd be. When I'd be back. What time I was eating. Control always reveals itself when it's threatened. I didn't block her number. I just stopped responding quickly. Hours instead of minutes. Short answers when necessary. No follow-ups. Silence where there used to be reassurance. It wasn't punishment. It was synchronization. She said I only touched her when I wanted something. Now I wanted nothing. One night, I didn't come home at all. I stayed at a cheap place near work. Slept without interruption. No notifications. No sound. When I returned the next afternoon to shower and change, she was waiting. Not angry. Alert. Like someone who realizes the rules have shifted but hasn't been briefed. She asked where I'd been. I said I was handling something. That was true. She stood in the doorway longer than necessary, blocking my path, trying to create a moment. I waited. She moved. Control doesn't push. It waits. By the end of the week, she started telling people I was distant, that I was stressed, that I needed space. She was rewriting the story before it finished unfolding. I let her. The more she talked, the less I had to explain. When disappearance is clean, it doesn't look like abandonment. It looks like inevitability. And inevitability is what finally makes people afraid. The move against him wasn't personal. That's what made it effective. I didn't reach out. I didn't warn. I didn't even say his name out loud. People like him operate on noise and assumption. Remove the noise, and the structure collapses under its own weight. It started with a conversation I wasn't part of. Someone from my wife's circle mentioned a promoter cutting corners. Venues booked without permits. Payments delayed. Promises made twice. I listened without reacting. I'd spent years learning when silence invites more information than questions ever could. Between shifts, I sat in my truck and made a call that didn't trace back to me. Not an accusation, just a redirection. I let the right people notice patterns they were already irritated by. That's how systems correct themselves. Not by force, by attention. The fallout didn't reach our apartment directly. It bled in through her tone. Her certainty slipped. She stopped mentioning his name. When she did, it was clipped, unfinished, like she was testing how it sounded in the air now. She started coming home earlier, dressing with less intention. Control requires confidence. Confidence requires stability. I didn't comment. I kept my distance precise. One afternoon, I passed a jewelry store on my way back from work. Sales. The same window she'd lingered in last year, pointing out rings she liked under the guise of aesthetics. I walked past without slowing. That was the moment I felt the full shift settle in. Not bitterness. Freedom. When symbols lose meaning, leverage disappears with them. At home, she tried a different angle. Softness. Memory. She brought up trips we'd taken. Jokes that used to land. She sat closer on the couch while the PlayStation glowed in the background, untouched, waiting for gravity to do what she couldn't ask for directly. It didn't. Her frustration started leaking outward. Friends noticed. Family asked questions. She began explaining me again, framing my absence as temporary, stress-related, a phase. The more she explained, the more obvious it became that she wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. I kept my routine intact. Work, gym, quiet meals, subway between appointments, no rush. I slept better. I thought clearer. When you remove yourself from someone's leverage, you start seeing how small their reach actually was. The promoter vanished from her orbit without announcement. No drama, just absence. That kind of man doesn't stay when applause fades. She hadn't chosen him for who he was. She'd chosen him for what she thought he'd make me do. By then, it was too late. She began watching me the way I'd once watched her. Timing, patterns, distance, trying to figure out what move came next. She didn't realize the move had already happened. I wasn't setting a trap. I was closing a system. And systems, once closed, don't reopen just because someone knocks harder. The social shift didn't arrive as confrontation. It arrived as hesitation. She started getting fewer invites. Not none, just fewer. The kind of reduction people pretend not to notice until it's too obvious to ignore. Her phone still lit up, but the tone changed. Messages came later. Replies were shorter. Group plans formed without looping her in first. When control slips publicly, it never announces itself. It just stops centering you. I saw it in how she dressed for events that no longer mattered. Overcorrecting. Too polished for rooms that had already moved on. She'd stand in front of the mirror longer, adjusting things no one would comment on anymore. The stage lights were dimming, and she felt it. At home, the PlayStation stayed on longer than usual. Not because she was playing, because silence had become unbearable. She filled the apartment with artificial presence while real presence evaporated. I moved through it untouched. Calm. Clean. Like I belonged to a different timeline now. Someone from her family asked me, casually, if everything was okay. Not concerned. Curious. That's when I knew the narrative had shifted outside her control. People don't ask questions when they believe the story they're being told. They ask when something doesn't line up. She started monitoring me in front of others. Small gestures. Touching my arm when people were watching. Laughing a beat too late at things I said. Trying to reattach publicly what she'd detached privately. I let her. I didn't reciprocate. That imbalance is louder than any refusal. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the table, phone face down, posture careful. She said people were asking questions. Not accusing me, just noticing distance. She framed it like concern for my reputation. I understood the translation. She was feeling exposed. I didn't reassure her. I said nothing that could be repeated. Silence, when observed by others, becomes a message of its own. I spent the weekend finishing a project in the garage. Clean lines. Measured cuts. Supplies I'd picked up earlier at Lowe's. She hovered once, then retreated. Control doesn't survive in rooms where it has no role. By Monday, the tone of her voice had changed completely. Less performative. More careful. She stopped trying to provoke and started trying to understand. That's the point where people realize attention doesn't equal power. Access does. I kept eating alone between shifts. Subway again. Same spot. Same order. Routine isn't empty when it's chosen. It's grounding. She began losing footing socially without a single accusation being spoken. No one confronted her. No one blamed her. They just adjusted. Pulled back. Watched. And she finally understood the danger wasn't exposure. It was irrelevance. She could feel herself slipping out of rooms without making a sound. And she knew, for the first time, that I wasn't going to pull her back in. Isolation doesn't look dramatic when it starts. It looks like empty hours. She began spending more time at home without actually being present. Sitting on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling without engagement, the PlayStation running menus in the background like a heartbeat she didn't trust anymore. She wasn't resting. She was waiting. For what? She couldn't name. I moved around her like furniture. Polite. Functional. Untouchable. I answered questions that mattered and ignored the ones designed to reopen space. I didn't sleep elsewhere every night anymore. I didn't need to. Distance had already settled between us. It didn't require geography. One evening, she asked if I still loved her. Not directly. She asked it sideways, through a comment about how people change, how marriages go quiet. I let the silence answer. Silence is honest when words would only confuse. She started reaching out to people who used to orbit her easily. Coffee plans stalled. Replies came late. When they did meet, she came home restless instead of energized. She'd talk in fragments, trying to reconstruct rooms she no longer controlled. Attention had shifted elsewhere, and she didn't know how to follow it without me anchoring her. I posted the Craigslist listing live without telling her it had gone up. By the time she noticed the inquiry notifications on my phone, it was already active. She didn't ask who it was for. She asked when. That distinction mattered. I watched her recalibrate in real time. The confidence that once carried her through rooms had turned into caution. She stopped dressing for impact and started dressing for reassurance. She lingered near me more often, not touching, just close enough to be felt. I stayed neutral. Presence without access is destabilizing. At work, my focus sharpened. Less mental noise. Fewer emotional calculations. Control returned to places where it belonged. I ate between shifts without rush, usually grabbing something quick and familiar. Routine doesn't ask questions. It just holds you steady. At home, she tried one last tactic. Vulnerability. She spoke about feeling alone, about not knowing where she stood, about missing how things were. She didn't mention him. She didn't need to. The absence of his name was its own admission. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she waited. Not for forgiveness. For touch. For some signal that her body still had meaning in the system. I stood up instead. Clean movement. No hesitation. I said I had an early morning and went to bed. That was the night she understood the difference between loneliness and loss. Loneliness can be solved with noise. Loss requires consent to accept what's gone. She lay awake next to me, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to feel nothing else. And for the first time, she realized I wasn't punishing her. I had simply exited the role she needed me to play. The confrontation didn't happen the way she'd rehearsed it. There was no raised voice, no dramatic entrance, no accusation she could anchor herself to. It happened on a quiet morning when urgency had nowhere to hide. She stood in the kitchen while I packed my lunch, watching me move with the same measured pace I used at work. That calm unsettled her more than anger ever could. She asked where this was going. Not emotionally. Logistically. She wanted coordinates. Timelines. Something she could grip. I didn't give her any. I finished packing, closed the bag, and leaned against the counter like there was nowhere else I needed to be. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. That I felt cold. That I'd changed. She framed it like a discovery instead of a consequence. I let her finish. People reveal themselves most clearly when they're trying to be understood. When she paused, waiting for explanation, I gave her exactly one sentence. Not defensive, not emotional, just accurate. I told her that I'd stopped reaching for things that were being used against me. Then I went back to what I was doing. That was the moment her voice shifted. Softer, slower. She tried to bring it back to the beginning. To the night she accused my touch. She said she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. That she was frustrated. That words came out wrong sometimes. I didn't correct her. Correction invites debate. I let her sit with the version she'd already given life to. She moved closer, carefully, like proximity itself might negotiate something back into place. I didn't step away. I didn't lean in. I stayed exactly where I was. Presence without participation. That's when she finally understood the depth of the change. Later that day, she noticed the open listing again. Craigslist, still active, inquiries stacking quietly. She didn't ask me to take it down. She asked if there was still time. That was the first honest question she'd asked in weeks. I went to work. Ate between shifts without hurry. Subway again, same seat, same view. Stability doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when everything else gets loud. That evening, she tried once more. No performance this time. No strategy. Just proximity and quiet. She sat beside me while the PlayStation menu looped endlessly, the sound low, almost apologetic. She didn't touch me. She waited to see if I would. I didn't. When people finally ask instead of demand, it means the leverage is gone. What comes next isn't negotiation. It's reckoning. And she was standing right at the edge of it, realizing too late that I'd already stepped beyond the part of the story where her reactions mattered. Her collapse wasn't loud. It didn't come with tears or scenes or desperate calls in the night. It came as a slow failure of things that used to work. She missed an event she'd been planning for months. Not because she forgot, because the room changed and no one told her in time. The message came late. Apologies wrapped in logistics. She sat at the kitchen table reading it twice, like repetition might reveal a hidden meaning. There wasn't one. That same week, a friend she'd leaned on for years canceled dinner. Not canceled exactly. Rescheduled into nothing. She started checking her phone more often again, but now it wasn't performance. It was inventory. Who was still there? Who wasn't? I watched it without involvement. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. I'd already stepped out of the emotional economy she was trying to stabilize. One night, she asked if we could talk. Not about us. About everything else falling apart. She said it felt like the ground was shifting. That people were distant. That she didn't know where she stood anymore. She didn't ask for comfort. She asked for orientation. I didn't give it to her. That's when the memories started surfacing for her. Not in order. Not cleanly. Small flashes she hadn't valued at the time. Me fixing things without being asked. Me waiting without complaint. Me choosing stability over spectacle. At the time, those moments had felt invisible. Now they arrived sharp, out of context, cutting through the quiet. She walked past a jewelry store later that week. Sales. She told me about it that night, like it meant something. Like passing the window had unlocked a version of me she thought was still accessible. I listened. I didn't respond. I kept my routine intact. Work. Silence. Familiar meals between shifts. Subway again, the same seat by the window. Watching people move through their lives without noticing me. It felt honest. The Craigslist listing filled faster than expected. I didn't rush the decision. I didn't celebrate it either. Movement doesn't need ceremony. She started losing control of her image entirely. Not publicly, quietly. People stopped asking her opinion, stopped looping her in. She wasn't excluded. She was bypassed. That's a deeper cut. One evening, she sat on the floor of the living room, back against the couch, staring at nothing. The PlayStation was off. Silence everywhere. She didn't ask me to sit with her. She just said she finally understood what she'd done. I believed her. Understanding, however, doesn't reverse consequences. It only explains them. She'd used her body as leverage. She'd mistaken reaction for power. And now, stripped of both, she was standing in the space where truth lives alone. I wasn't there to rescue her from it. I was already living past it. The ending didn't arrive as a decision. It arrived as alignment. There was no final argument. No moment where everything spilled out and reset itself. That kind of ending only happens when people are still trying to win. I wasn't. I'd already adjusted my life to a shape that didn't require her reactions to function. She approached me on a quiet evening, careful in a way she'd never been before. Not strategic, not performative, just exposed. She said she finally understood why the silence hurt more than any fight ever could. She said she'd confused attention with intimacy and control with closeness. She said she'd been wrong. I believed her again. Belief doesn't equal return. She waited after that, standing still, as if stillness itself might be the price of entry. I let the pause stretch, not to punish, to see if she could tolerate the space without trying to fill it. She couldn't. She asked if I was leaving. Not emotionally, practically. The way people ask when they already know the answer but need to hear the shape of it. I told her I wasn't disappearing. I was just no longer showing up where I wasn't respected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften it either. Clarity doesn't need volume. Later that night, I packed what was already separated. No rush. No drama. The truck was ready. It always had been. Control isn't built in emergencies. It's built quietly, over time, when no one is watching. She stood in the doorway as I moved past her, not blocking me this time. She didn't reach. She didn't ask me to stay. That restraint was new. It was also too late. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Cleaner. I drove without music. No notifications. No need to check anything. The Craigslist listing had already done its job. Movement was already in motion. I stopped once on the way, out of habit more than hunger. Familiar place. Familiar order. Subway again, eaten slowly, standing by the window. People moved past without noticing me. I liked that. When I finally settled into the quiet of my own space, I didn't feel victory. I felt completion. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. She'd wanted to control desire by withholding it. I'd removed desire from the equation entirely. That wasn't revenge. It was synchronization taken to its logical end. Somewhere behind me, she was sitting in a room that no longer responded to her presence, replaying moments she'd dismissed when they were offered freely. I didn't go back to explain. I didn't need to. I hadn't disappeared. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.